I stood at the curb, watching the taillights disappear into the evening traffic, and for a moment I thought it was a mistake. The plastic bags cut into my palms. Milk, bread, eggs, the laundry detergent my mother had insisted we needed tonight. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, certain the car would loop back around, certain someone would realise. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The automatic doors behind me whooshed open and closed, as other shoppers walked past me to their waiting cars, their waiting families. A woman with a toddler on her hip gave me a curious glance. An elderly man nodded politely. I smiled back at them, the expression feeling foreign on my face, because somewhere deep in my chest, I already knew the truth. They weren't coming back. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. 3 missed calls from my sister Priya, all from earlier that afternoon when I'd been in class. No messages, no frantic texts asking where I was. I dialed my mother's number and it rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, this is Kamala. Leave a message." I tried my father next. Same result. Then Priya. She answered on the 4th ring and I could hear laughter in the background, the distant sound of my father's voice telling some story, my mother's soft chuckle. "Hello?" Priya sounded distracted, vaguely annoyed at the interruption. "You left me," I said. "At the store. You drove away." A pause, then a sigh, as if I had said something tedious. "Oh, Lena, I thought you were getting a ride with your friend. Didn't Mum tell you?" No one told me anything. I was inside for 15 minutes. I came out and the car was gone. Wow. Another pause. More laughter behind her. "We're already home now. It's like 20 minutes back. Can't you just take the bus or something? Or call an Uber?" I looked down at my wallet. $14 and some coins. Not enough for an Uber. Maybe enough for the bus if I could figure out which route went where. "The groceries," I said. "Mom sent me in for groceries. I have all the bags." "So bring them when you get here. Look, Lena, I have to go. We're about to eat dinner." The call ended before I could respond. I stood there for a long time after that, the phone pressed against my ear even though there was no one on the other end anymore. The automatic doors kept whooshing. The parking lot kept emptying as the store moved toward closing time. The streetlights flickered on, casting everything in that harsh orange glow that makes the world look slightly unreal. They were eating dinner, all of them together, at the table where my place was always the one closest to the kitchen, the one where I could easily get up to refill water glasses or fetch forgotten napkins. They were eating dinner, and no one had even noticed I wasn't there. No, that wasn't quite true. They had noticed. They had simply decided it didn't matter enough to come back. I thought about all the other times, the graduation ceremony where my father had left early because Priya had a headache, the birthday dinner that became Priya's engagement announcement, my cake never even brought out from the kitchen, the family vacation where I'd ended up in the single cot by the bathroom while everyone else shared the 2 queen beds, because Priya needed space to spread out. The college fund that had been quietly redirected to pay for Priya's wedding dress, her honeymoon, her new apartment deposit, while I worked 2 jobs and took out loans. I had always told myself there were reasons. Priya was the eldest, the accomplished one, the one who had given them a son-in-law and the promise of grandchildren. Priya needed things, and I was the one who could manage without. I was the flexible one, the understanding one, the one who never complained. I had made it so easy for them to forget me. The bus shelter was 3 blocks away, and by the time I reached it, the milk was sweating through the paper bag and my arms ached from the weight. I sat down on the metal bench and watched the traffic flow past, headlights blurring through the tears I refused to let fall. The bus came. I didn't get on. I just sat there, holding grocery bags that were slowly tearing at the handles, thinking about 23 years of being the afterthought. The backup plan. The one who could always be counted on to understand. It was almost 9 o'clock when I finally started walking. not toward the bus stop for the route that would take me home. Just walking. The groceries grew heavier with every block, and eventually I set them down on a bench outside a closed coffee shop and kept going. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The bridge came into view around 11. I hadn't meant to walk there. I hadn't meant anything at all. But my feet had carried me to the place where the river ran dark, and the city lights reflected on the water like scattered diamonds, and I stood at the railing and looked down. It would be so easy. The thought arrived without drama, without any of the anguish I would have expected. Just a quiet observation, like noting that the coffee shop was closed or that the bus was late. It would be so easy to simply stop, to let go of the railing and the grocery bags I no longer carried and the weight of being someone no one wanted to remember. Would they notice? Would they look up from their dinner table tomorrow and wonder where I was? Or would it take days, weeks before someone thought to check? I climbed over the railing. The metal was cold against my palms, and below me the water churned in lazy circles, patient and dark. I thought about Priya, who had always been the sun while I orbited in her shadow. I thought about my mother, who looked at Priya with such pride and at me with such persistent disappointment. I thought about my father, who had once told me I was too quiet, too plain, too forgettable to ever really succeed at anything. I thought about the boy I had loved in college, Vikram, who had left me for Priya's best friend because she was more exciting, more vibrant, more alive. I thought about the apartment I couldn't afford and the degree I was struggling to finish, and the job interviews where they always picked someone else, someone who walked into rooms like they belonged there. I let go. The fall was shorter than I expected, and longer. Time stretched and compressed in ways that made no sense, and the cold of the water hit me like concrete, driving all the air from my lungs. I sank. The current pulled at my clothes, my hair, my limbs. I opened my mouth to scream, and water rushed in, filling all the empty spaces. There was no peace in it, no release, just cold and dark, and the terrible understanding that this was how it ended. And then there was nothing. The light came first, not the harsh fluorescent of a hospital room or the soft glow of some imagined afterlife. Just ordinary morning light, filtering through curtains I recognised, falling across a bedspread I had slept under 1,000 times before. My bedroom. My childhood bedroom, in my parents' house, with the posters I had taken down years ago, still tacked to the walls and the desk still cluttered with textbooks from high school. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. My body felt wrong, lighter, smaller, unfamiliar in ways I couldn't immediately identify. I looked down at my hands and saw them smooth and unlined, the small scar on my left thumb missing entirely. The calendar on my wall said March. 3 years ago. I was 20 years old again. I got out of bed and walked to the mirror on the back of my door, and the face that looked back at me was mine, but younger, softer. The face of a girl who still believed that if she just tried harder, worked longer, gave more of herself, eventually her family would love her the way they loved her sister. I remembered this day. I remembered it with perfect clarity, the memory rising up like something long buried finally breaking the surface. This was the day they left me at the store, the first time. The pattern had already begun, years before I recognised it for what it was. Small abandonments, minor forgettings, tiny cuts that never quite healed before the next one came. But this day had been different. This was the day I'd first understood, in some dim and wordless way, that I was not a priority, that I never would be, and I had done nothing about it. I had walked home that night and slipped quietly into my place at the dinner table and pretended everything was fine, because That was what I did. That was what I always did. Not this time. I showered slowly, deliberately, watching the water run down a body that felt borrowed. I dressed in clothes I remembered, jeans, a blue sweater, sensible shoes. I looked at myself in the mirror again and saw someone I had forgotten existed, Lena as 20, before the weight of all those years had settled permanently into her shoulders. When I went downstairs, my mother was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. She glanced up at me without really seeing me. "Oh, good, you're awake. Priya needs a ride to her fitting at 4, so we'll leave around 3:30. Make sure you're ready." "What fitting?" I asked, though I already knew. "Her wedding dress, Lena. Honestly, don't you pay attention to anything?" Priya's wedding? Of course. The event that had consumed our family for the past 6 months, that had redirected every conversation and every resource and every ounce of parental attention toward my sister's perfect day. I had been the one to address the invitations, the one to research caterers and florists and venues, presenting options for Priya to approve or reject with a wave of her hand, the one to alter my own schedule again and again to accommodate fittings and tastings and meetings that somehow always required my presence, but never my input. "I have class at 4, I said. "I told you last week. I have an exam review that I can't miss." My mother's stirring slowed. She looked at me with that familiar expression. Not anger, not disappointment, just a kind of weary incomprehension, as if I was speaking a language she had never bothered to learn. "Lena, this is your sister's wedding." "Yes, and this is my education." A pause. My mother set down the spoon and turned to face me fully, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at this deviation from the script we had all followed for so long. "You can review on your own. Priya needs family support at this fitting. Then you and Dad can support her. I'll be at my exam review." I walked out of the kitchen before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but something in my chest felt lighter than it had in years. This was wrong. This wasn't how the pattern went. I was supposed to agree, to accommodate, to set aside my own needs for the sake of family harmony. But I had already died once for family harmony, and I was not going to do it again. My father was in the living room, reading the newspaper. He looked up as I passed. "Your mother says you're being difficult about the fitting." "I have class," I said. "My exam review is more important than watching Priya try on dresses." He frowned, and I saw the familiar disappointment settle into the lines of his face. But I also saw something else. Confusion. I had never pushed back before. I had never asserted that my needs might matter as much as anyone else's. "Lena, family comes first, you know that." "Yes," I said. "I'm starting to understand exactly how that works." I left the house with my backpack and walked to class, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I did not look back to see if anyone was watching me go. The weeks that followed were a study in small rebellions. I stopped answering my phone when Priya called, with last-minute demands. I stopped rearranging my schedule around family events. I started saying no, to the extra errands my mother wanted me to run, to the rides my father expected me to provide, to the 1,000 tiny tasks that had always fallen to me because I was the one who never refused. I also started saying yes, to myself, to the study group I had always been too busy to join, to the coffee dates with classmates who had given up inviting me anywhere, to the evenings spent in my room with books I actually wanted to read, instead of wedding planning spreadsheets and seating charts. My grades improved. My sleep improved. The constant knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for years began to loosen, slowly, strand by strand, and my family noticed. They noticed, and they did not like it. "You've changed," Priya said one afternoon, stopping me in the hallway outside my room. She was still beautiful. She had always been beautiful, with our mother's delicate features and our father's height. But for the first time, I saw the tightness around her eyes, the set of her jaw that suggested displeasure. "Have I?" You used to be helpful. You used to care about this family. I still care, I said. I'm just learning to care about myself too. Priya's lip curled. That's selfish. Maybe. I stepped around her and continued toward my room. But it's also necessary. The fitting happened without me. The wedding planning continued without me. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, the family began to work around my absence, instead of demanding my presence. It hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. To watch them adjust to my boundaries, to see how easily they found other people to run their errands and solve their problems, it confirmed everything I had always feared. That I was not irreplaceable. That my value had always been in my compliance, not in myself. But there was freedom in that hurt. A kind of terrible liberation in finally seeing the truth I had always known but never acknowledged. I was not loved for who I was. I was loved for what I did. And when I stopped doing, the love evaporated like morning dew. The wedding came in June. I had not helped with the final arrangements. I had not attended the rehearsal dinner, citing a study group I couldn't miss. I had not gone to the salon with Priya and my mother and the bridesmaids for hair and makeup, had not helped zip up the dress I had never seen tried on, had not stood in the church bathroom with tissues and hairpins solving last-minute crises. But I was there. I sat in the pew with the other family members, wearing a dress I had chosen for myself, not the matching burgundy Priya had selected for close family, but a simple green that suited my colouring and made me feel like myself. I watched my sister walk down the aisle, radiant and perfect, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not resentment, not the bitter envy that had sometimes poisoned my thoughts in the years before. Just a quiet emptiness, where all those complicated feelings used to live. The reception was in a garden, fairy lights strung through the trees, and white tablecloths gleaming under the evening sky. I sat at the family table sipping water, watching people dance and laugh and celebrate. My mother appeared at my elbow. "You could try to look happy," she said. "This is your sister's day." "I am happy for her," I said. "I'm just not performing happiness for everyone else's benefit." She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her eyes I couldn't quite identify. Not anger, something closer to bewilderment. "I don't know what's happened to you," she said finally. "You used to be such a good girl." "I still am," I said. "I'm just not good at pretending anymore." She walked away, and I sat alone at the table, watching the fairy lights sway in the breeze. Later that night, after the toasts and the first dance and the cutting of the cake, I found myself standing near the edge of the garden, looking out at the city beyond the hedge. The party continued behind me, music and laughter carrying on the warm air. Someone came to stand beside me. I didn't turn to look. "You missed the bouquet toss," my father said. "I saw it from here." "Priya's friend Mira caught it." "I know." A pause. He cleared his throat. "Your mother thinks you're angry about something." "I'm not angry." "Then what are you?" I considered the question. In another life, I might have answered with a lie. "I'm fine, I'm tired, I'm just overwhelmed by all the emotions." But that Lena had drowned in a river 3 years from now, and I had no interest in resurrecting her. "I'm making choices," I said. "For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want instead of what everyone else needs from me." My father was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Your mother and I have done our best with both of you, you know. We've tried to be fair." "I know you believe that." "Lena, it's okay, Dad." I turned to face him, and I saw something in his expression I had never noticed before. Uncertainty, as if he were suddenly unsure of the ground he stood on. "I'm not asking for apologies or explanations. I'm just telling you who I'm becoming. You can decide what to do with that information." I walked back to the party before he could respond. The store invitation came 2 months later. By then, I had moved out of my parents' pine house and into a small apartment near campus. I was working part-time at a bookstore, saving money carefully, planning for a future that belonged to me instead of to everyone else's expectations. I spoke to my family once a week, brief and pleasant conversations that never went below the surface. When my mother called to say we were all going shopping, the whole family together to buy furniture for Priya's new apartment, I recognised the trap immediately. "I can meet you there," I said, "but I'll drive myself." A pause on the other end of the line. "That's silly, Lena. We can all go together." "I prefer to have my own car, in case I need to leave early." "Leave early? Why would you need to leave early?" "Because you left me before. Because I know now that I cannot trust you to remember I exist. Because I have learned, finally, to protect myself from people who see me only when they need something from me." I didn't say any of that. I just said, "I'll meet you there at 2. The furniture store was vast and overwhelming, full of showroom apartments and carefully staged living rooms that looked like they belonged in magazines. Priya swept through the aisles with my mother close behind, pointing at sofas and dining sets and bed frames, her voice carrying that particular edge of someone who expects to get exactly what she wants. I followed at a distance, observing rather than participating. I noticed how my father's attention tracked to Priya whenever she spoke, how my mother reached out to touch Priya's arm in small gestures of connection, how I could have vanished entirely and no one would have noticed for hours. The familiar ache rose up in my chest, but it was distant now, a remembered pain rather than a present one. "Lena, come look at this," Priya called from across the store. "Tell me if you think this colour would work with my curtains." I walked over and looked at the armchair she was indicating. It was beige, inoffensive, exactly the kind of thing Priya would choose. "It's fine," I said. Priya frowned. "That's not helpful. I need an actual opinion." "My opinion is that you should choose what you like because you're the one who has to live with it. You used to care about these things. I used to pretend to care about a lot of things." Something flickered in Priya's eyes, hurt maybe, or anger. But before she could respond, my father called out from across the store. "Let's head out. Your mother wants to stop for coffee on the way home." I watched them move toward the exit, watched my mother link her arm through Priya's, watched my father fall into step behind them. None of them looked back to see if I was following. I walked in a different direction, toward the garden section at the back of the store, and I took my time. I looked at potted plants and outdoor furniture. I examined the price tags on ceramic planters. I let the minutes stretch out, curious to see how long it would take. My phone buzzed after 20 minutes, a text from my mother. "Where are you?" They were in the parking lot. They had gone all the way to the car, loaded their purchases into the trunk, and only then realised I wasn't with them. I walked to the front of the store and found them waiting by the entrance, expressions ranging from impatient to irritated. "What were you doing back there?" my mother asked. "We were calling for you." "No, you weren't," I said. "You texted me after you'd already left the store. We thought you were right behind us. You didn't check." Pause. My father shifted uncomfortably. "Let's just go," Priya said. "I want coffee." "I'm going to head home," I said. "I have work in a couple hours." "You're not coming for coffee?" "Not today." I walked to my car without waiting for a response. Behind me, I could hear my mother's voice, too low to make out the words, and my father's murmured reply. But I didn't turn around. I got into my car and drove away, watching them shrink in my rearview mirror until they disappeared entirely. That night, I sat in my small apartment with a cup of tea and watched the city lights from my window. The space was modest. A studio, really, with a fold-out couch and a kitchenette barely big enough to turn around in. But it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, every plant on the windowsill, I had chosen it all myself. For myself. My phone buzzed. A text from Priya. "That was rude today. Mom is upset." I looked at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back, "I'm sorry, Mum is upset. I'll call her tomorrow." I didn't apologise for leaving. I didn't explain or justify or promise to do better next time. I simply acknowledged their feelings and set a boundary around my own. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The years that followed were a slow unfolding. I finished my degree, then started another. I moved to a better apartment, then a better job. I built friendships that nourished me instead of draining me, dated people who saw me clearly instead of looking through me. My relationship with my family became something new, distant but stable. We spoke on holidays and birthdays, we gathered for major events, but I no longer twisted myself into shapes to fit their expectations, and they no longer quite knew what to do with me. Priya's marriage produced a child, then two. My parents became grandparents, consumed by the new generation in ways that left even less room for me. I watched from the edges, feeling neither bitterness nor grief, just the quiet acknowledgement of what had always been true. I built a life that did not depend on their attention. I became someone who did not need their love to know her own worth. And then, one evening, I received a phone call. "Lena," my mother's voice, strained and thin. "Your father's had a heart attack. You need to come to the hospital." I drove through the night, arriving just as the sky began to lighten. The hospital was hushed and sterile, the waiting room full of pale faces and untouched coffee cups. My mother sat in the corner, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Priya was there with her husband, their children left with a neighbour, both of them haggard and red-eyed. I sat down beside my mother. She didn't look at me. "How is he?" "Stable, they say. They're keeping him for observation." I nodded. Priya's husband got up to find the coffee machine, and Priya slumped forward in her chair, her face in her hands. "I can't believe this," she said, her voice muffled. "He was fine yesterday. He was completely fine." My mother reached over to pat Priya's back, murmuring comfort. I sat quietly watching them, remembering other hospital waiting rooms, other crises where I had been the one to handle logistics while everyone else fell apart. A nurse came to tell us we could see him, one at a time. My mother went first, then Priya. When it was my turn, I walked down the corridor alone, my footsteps echoing on the linoleum. My father looked small in the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and IV lines. His eyes were closed, but they opened when I sat down beside him. "Lena." His voice was rough, barely a whisper. "You came." "Of course I came." "I wasn't sure you would." I looked at him, this man who had never quite seen me, who had always looked past me to the daughter who demanded more attention, more praise, more of everything. I saw the grey in his hair, the lines on his face, the fragility that illness had exposed. "I'm not angry, Dad," I said. "I haven't been angry for a long time." "I know." He paused, swallowed with effort. "I know you're not. That's what makes it worse." "What do you mean?" He turned his head on the pillow to look at me properly, and I saw tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. "Your mother and I," he said slowly, "we weren't fair to you. We always thought Priya needed more. She was louder, more demanding. We thought you were fine. You always seemed fine. I made it easy for you to think that." "Yes." He closed his eyes for a moment. "But we should have looked harder. We should have seen what we were doing." I sat with those words, letting them settle. Part of me wanted to say it didn't matter, that I had moved past it. But that wasn't quite true. "It hurt," I said finally. "For a long time, it really hurt." "I know." A tear slipped down his cheek. "I'm sorry, Lena. I'm so sorry." I reached out and took his hand. His grip was weak, his skin papery and dry. "I forgive you," I said, "not because you've earned it, but because carrying that weight doesn't serve me anymore." He nodded, his eyes still closed. "That's more than I deserve." Maybe. I squeezed his hand gently, but it's what I'm choosing to give. I sat with him until the nurse came to tell me visiting hours were ending. I walked back to the waiting room, where my mother and Priya were gathering their things. "How is he?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "Tired, but he wanted to talk." Priya gave me a sharp look. "What about?" "Old things," I said. Things that needed to be said. She opened her mouth to ask more, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She just nodded and turned away, reaching for her bag. My mother hesitated, then reached out to touch my arm. It was the first time in years she had initiated contact. "Will you come to the house?" she asked. "To stay, I mean, while your father recovers." I considered it. The old Lena would have said yes immediately, would have moved in and taken charge and handled everything, while everyone else grieved. But I was not that person anymore. "I can stay for a few days," I said, "but I have work. I have a life. I can help, but I can't move back in." She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or acceptance. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Lena, that's enough." I stayed for 4 days. I helped organise my father's medications and scheduled his follow-up appointments. I made meals that went mostly uneaten and kept the house clean while my mother sat by his bedside. I was present, but I was also careful. Careful to rest when I needed to step away when the old patterns threatened to pull me under. On the last day, my mother walked me to my car. The morning was bright and cold, frost still clinging to the grass. "Thank you," she said, "for coming, for helping." "You're welcome." She hesitated, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. "I remember the day we left you at the store," she said suddenly. "All those years ago, we didn't realise, we just drove away and you had to find your own way home." I waited. "I think about that sometimes," she continued. "I think about all the ways we left you to figure things out on your own." "Yes," I said, "you did. I'm sorry." I looked at her, my mother, who had never quite known how to love me the way I needed to be loved. I saw the regret in her eyes, genuine and raw. "I know," I said. "Is it too late? To be different?" I thought about the question carefully. In another life, I might have rushed to reassure her, to smooth over the discomfort and restore the peace. But I had learned that honesty, even when it was painful, was the only foundation that could hold. "It's not too late to try," I said, "but it will take time, and it will take action, not just words." She nodded slowly. "I understand." I got into my car and rolled down the window. "Call me when Dad has his follow-up. I want to know how it goes." "I will." I drove away, and this time, when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw my mother standing in the driveway, watching me go. A year later, my father had recovered, though his health remained fragile. My family had not transformed overnight. That kind of change rarely happens so cleanly. But something had shifted. My mother called more often. My father asked questions about my life, my work, my interests. Even Priya, in her way, made efforts to include me rather than taking my presence for granted. It wasn't perfect. They still forgot things, my birthday once, a promotion I had mentioned excitedly. They still gravitated toward Priya, still lit up when she entered a room in ways they never quite did for me. But I no longer measured my worth by their attention. I had built a life that sustained me, relationships that nourished me, a sense of self that did not depend on anyone else's validation. I thought sometimes about the other Lena, the one who had stood on the bridge and let go. I thought about her pain, her loneliness, her desperate need to matter to people who could not see her. I grieved for her, even as I understood that her ending had made my new beginning possible. One evening, I drove past the old grocery store, the one where they had left me all those years ago. It had been renovated, the facade updated, But I still recognized the parking lot, the bus shelter 3 blocks away, the street lights that cast everything in harsh orange. I pulled into the lot and parked. I sat for a long time, watching the automatic doors whoosh open and closed, remembering the girl I had been. She had stood here abandoned and forgotten, waiting for someone to come back for her. She had walked to the bridge and let the cold water take her, believing she was worth nothing to anyone. But she had been wrong. Not about her family, they had failed her in their carelessness and their blindness, but about herself, about her value, about the life that waited on the other side of that moment. I got out of the car and walked to the curb where I had once stood with grocery bags cutting into my palms. I stood there feeling the evening air on my face, watching the city move around me. And then I got back in my car and drove home. Not to my parents' house, not to the place where I had always been an afterthought, but to the apartment I had chosen, the life I had built, the person I had become. I was Lena. I had been left behind and I had found my own way forward. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.